But it looked like that diversity couldn't be explained in terms of any sort of strategic consideration or culturally variable risk aversion, anything of that sort. Rather, it looks like participants, use the wrong word, participants distribute windfall gains differently because they have different views about fairness, specifically about how to fairly distribute windfall gains. And it's very plausible that these differences in attitude about fairness, which is clearly an important part of morality, are fundamental. They're not based on disagreement in non-moral beliefs. They're not the kinds of things that Boyd and Brink could comfortably explain. But, there's always a but, right? These studies typically, and there are dozens of others that I could cite for you, typically don't persuade the moral realists who think that moral disputes are in principle resolvable if you just get enough factual disagreement. And many moral realists, perfectly appropriately, by the way, this is the way an intelligent debate should go here, focus on the details of the studies, pointing out shortcomings in one or another study. Often those shortcomings include sources of factual disagreement that haven't yet been explored. And of course, there's a sense in which you're never going to explore them all because in principle there are indefinitely many. Right? So what do we do now? I think of these as, I used to give a talk like this and I get what I think of as the yes, but objection. People would say, yes, but you haven't controlled for, and of course you can't control for everything. Well, I think that to move the debate forward, what we need in addition to these empirical findings is an empirically supported theory of the psychological mechanisms underlying the acquisition and utilization of moral norms, and an empirically informed account of how those mechanisms might have evolved. And as it happens, I have one to sell you. Chandra Sripada and I have recently published a bunch of papers that do just that. So if you want to know what moral cognition looks like, that's the answer. Our model claims that moral judgments are largely determined by rules in a part of the mind brain which we call the norm database, which are in turn largely determined by the acquisition mechanism, which is heavily influenced by the norms that prevail in the social environment. So, if our model is right, people who grow up in social environments in which different norms prevail will often make different moral judgments even under ideal conditions where there are no relevant factual disagreements. Okay? Well, Sripada and I, in our original publication, surveyed quite a large swath of literature which we argue is consistent with this model. The last 3 or 4 years, I've been doing a bunch of other research that tries to test the model, and there's more data that I believe is consistent with it. I pleaded with the organizers of the afternoon's event to give me another couple of hours because I was sure you wanted to hear all of these findings in detail, but they said no. So I'm going to focus on just one little bit of evidence that deals with the role of emotions in moral judgment. Well, according to our model, emotions play a central role in moral judgments. Indeed, one simplified account of our model is that moral norms on our model are really socially acquired emotion triggers. That's a little bit too simple, but it's a good first pass. And Dan Kelly, in his Rutgers PhD thesis, argued that there's good reason to believe that at least one pre-existing emotion system, namely the disgust system, was there before moral capacities began to evolve and was co-opted or exapted, as it's sometimes said, by the moral judgment system when it evolved. Okay? So this is the picture that Dan Kelly's work suggests, that the disgust system needs to be segregated out as a separate part, and that it was there before sophisticated moral judgment capacity evolved. But important thing to note is that this disgust system which was co-opted or exapted, can be triggered in lots of ways, some of which have nothing to do with morality or with norms, and a number of really important and I think very striking and memorable studies have shown that even when triggered by these non-moral factors, the disgust system can have dramatic and persistent effects on people's judgments about moral issues. So let me just show you what I have in mind here. Here's the picture that I had up before. So the idea is that the disgust system can be triggered by stuff happening over here, but of course it can also be triggered up there. Okay? Where do we find this happening? Let me just mention very briefly three wonderful studies for you. John Haidt and his student Wheatley have shown that when participants are hypnotically induced to feel mild pangs of disgust when they see a certain word, for example, the word often, and then presented with a scenario like the one here. Dan is a student council representative at his school. This semester, he's in charge of scheduling discussions about academic issues. He often picks topics, it's not in red in the study, of course. He often picks topics that appeal to both professors and students in order to stimulate discussion. Many participants judge Dan is doing something wrong here. The control class, by the way, exposes them to exactly the same scenario, with often replaced by frequently. No moral judgment there. Okay? What's going on? The leak. Okay? Two more studies very quickly. Simone Schnall, who's been one of the leaders in this area, has shown that participants make much more severe moral judgments when they're made in a slightly disgust-evoking office. Greasy pizza boxes, sticky chair, dried up smoothie. Oh, and you need to fill out the questionnaire. Here's a chewed up ballpoint pen. Okay? In more recent work, Simone and her collaborators compared judgments about moral severity. So she gives people scenarios and just asks them to judge whether it's wrong and how severe, how bad it is. And she looks at two groups of participants. One group has just used an alcohol-based cleaning gel on their hands. The other group has used an ordinary non-cleansing hand cream. Anybody want to guess? The moral judgments of those using the cleaning gel were significantly less severe than the moral judgments of those using the ordinary hand cream. A footnote I always add here. My philosophy colleagues, many of them at least, not Bob and Frankie, but many of them hate this observation. But this stuff has real-world applications. If you're being tried for a crime by a jury of your peers, you don't want dirty pizza boxes or the equivalent in the jury room, and you want to be sure your lawyer puts lots of alcohol-based hand cream, cleansing cream in the men's room and the ladies' room. Well, the take-home message from these studies and many other similar ones is that moral judgment, the moral judgment system, is a kludge. And for those of you who don't know what a kludge is, here are two definitions. I like the backronym best. Clumsy, lame, ugly, dumb, but good enough. Just the sort of thing that natural selection has built a lot. Okay? Last thing I want to talk to you about, the 3 or 4 slides left, is to apply this in another way. So let me tell you a little bit about the work and claims of this man. Some of you